Greetings viewers, I assume you have just come from my previous HTML tutorial part 1. Welcome to part 2. If you haven't seen it, it's in the description. This tutorial would consist of more useful tags that are essential to many web pages. Hello everyone, we'll be continuing off from where we left off in the previous tutorial. So to recap, we were discussing about how anchor links work and how we can link to different parts of the page. So to demonstrate, if you go all the way down, oh, excuse me, I deleted a few things, but let's suppose we go back and click this link over here. It should take me all the way to the top. How to do that? Well, you're gonna have to do a equals href and link to an ID. You can call it ID whatever you want. I like to call it top, and it needs to have a hashtag. But wherever you link it to, that should not have a hashtag, and it should have a ID equals top, and it should not be closing. Cool. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about some really important other tags which are imperative to a very good web page. So those tags are divs and spans. So to start off, let me first check. Okay, so all the changes have been applied. So div tags look like this. So these are basically divisions, and span tags look like this respectively. So I'll start off with div tags and let's move on from there. Okay, so div tags don't seem to be doing any changes at the moment, but div tags are rather special, and here's why. So let me type this in. Now, you might expect that it would say hello world on the same line, but if you take a look, it does not. The reason for this is because the div tags are block elements. There are two main types of elements, although there are many other ones. So they're called block and inline elements. So div tags are block elements, so that means that they take up the entire horizontal space of the page, each individual element. So if you were to take a look at, if I were to, let's say, add a few more of these, let me just copy paste these over and over, just to show you how it works. So it's world, world, world over and over on different lines because div tags are block elements. Now, what about span? So how is span different? Now, span is an inline element. An inline element is an element which would have, which would be not taking up the entire space of the horizontal space of the page, but would allow different elements to exist side by side. So to clear up confusions, here's how it works. So hello, and let's just copy that and let's turn that to world. See how that looks. And yes, as you can see, it's an inline element, therefore on the same line different elements can exist with it, so it doesn't take up the entire space. That's the difference. But if I were to, let's say, add a div tag at this point, I'm not sure. Anything works, as you can see. So anything is on a separate line, as you can see, because the div tags are block elements. Now that you understand the basics between block elements and inline elements, let's move on to form elements. Now let me go over to google.com, the most prominent page, most prominent search engine. Let's type something in. Now, as you can see, this field where you type stuff in is called an input field in any web page. So how do we get this? Now, buttons and input fields are very important, so which is why I'm going to be covering it in this tutorial. So in order to do that, we need to realize that everything, or usually at least, all the different inputs are encased inside a form tag. Now let me just open up a form tag just by doing that. Ignore all these attributes. These are not required at this point in time, so just delete them if you please, and let's continue on. So in order to get an input, we need to type in input, and we would be getting an input tag. Now, as you can observe, the input tag does not need to be closed, just like the ing tag in the previous tutorial, which makes this tag a non-closing tag. So simple enough. Now, these different values that you see inside here are not necessarily are not required at this point in time, but what is required is this, the type. We're going to be looking at a few different input types. So enough of that. Let's see how it looks like. Okay, we have an input field over here. Let's just type something here. As you can see, you've typed in a bit of text and it is displayed in the input. That means that you're going to be grabbing data from this and processing it. Now, we're not going to be doing any data handling. We're not going to be giving any function to the form. We're just here to discuss the different types of inputs and important buttons you can add to your page. Okay, so let's talk about the password type. Now, suppose you are logging in into a sign up form and you want to just you don't want the password to be shown. Usually, that's what big companies do. They just hide whatever's inside the input field. So this is a normal input field. Type equals text. Here's type equals password. So this is a password field where you cannot really see what's being typed in, so that a person sitting next to you or wherever nearby cannot see what is inside the input field. What else is there? There's type equals number. So let's just take a look at that. So that would create a number field, which means that you cannot type in any type of text. Maybe E you can type in because E is the natural number, I believe. So that's why it's allowed to be put in. But any other kind of numbers, digits are allowed in this field. You can also increment the digits like this, or you could just type in a really big number and increment or decrement as you please. So that is input type equals number. Now the thing is, the different inputs I'm showing you here are not all that exist. There are a lot more type of inputs which are not being covered. The next is the input type equals color. So let me just reload the page, and there we go. This is the input type equals color. So you can choose colors inside here, and it would be stored inside the input value. Let's say green, for example. So if you take a look, it has stored the value green, and you can use, let's say, JavaScript, which is another front-end web language, to access the value and do something with it. Now, using raw HTML, let's try and create a sign-up form. Very basic. So we'll be using the center tag, which would center everything, all the elements to the center, of course, justify them to the center, and open up another form tag. Let me just get rid of all this, and let's continue on. So let me just see if the changes have been applied. Cool, now let's add a few inputs. So as you can see, a sign-up form has a username, password, confirm password, and possibly an email. So there's no specific type for email, it's just type equals text. So let me just do that, input type equals text, and let me just copy that 4 times over. So this is the username, this is the email, this is the password, and this is the confirm password field. Now, these would require to be type equals password. So if I were to look at how it looks right now, it would all be on one line, which doesn't make any sense, right? So therefore, oh, and also my mistake, I forgot to include a header. You want to know the user, what is this for, right? Let's just do sign up. Now, as you can see, when we put the H1, it takes up the entire space, therefore not allowing any elements to exist right next to it. What does it make H1? A block element, just a recap of the theory of block and inline elements. So as you would have noticed, all input fields are, any input field for that matter, is an inline element. So let me just add some break tags to actually, put everything on a separate line. Okay, there we go. Now you want to know the user, what each field is for, right? So in order to do that, we have a very special what do you say? We have a very special attribute which will help us, which is called placeholder. So if you put in a placeholder of username, it will tell the user that this is the username field, or whatever you want to type in here. You can even type in some gibberish and it'll show up. So that's the placeholder field. Now let's fill that up for everything else. So we want the email of the user at this point. Oh, sorry, that's a value. My mistake. Let's make that placeholder. Oh my God. Okay, there we go. So we have the email. Now let's type in the password. Let me just, we'll get rid of that in a moment. Placeholder equals password. And here the placeholder is equal to confirm password. Okay, cool. So we've made our first sign up form. Great. But how do we submit this? We need a button, right? So let me just add a button. So how do we add a button? You can type in button, and that's how the button tag works. It's the tag name is button, and it also is a closing tag, and whatever you want the button to say, you put it over here. Let's say submit. So it says submit. You can even, like I said, type in some nonsense here and it'll come up. So that is the button tag for you. So now, as you might have realized, that the button tag is an inline element, and therefore you need a break tag to be able to put it on a separate line. Cool, our sign up form's done. Now there's one last input type, which is very similar to a button, but not exactly a button. So that is an input type equals button. Now you might be confused as to what this is, but this is nothing but an input field which you can't type in anything, but it's actually a button. So if I were to type in submit or whatever it is, it will be the exact same thing. Now, don't be confused. This is not a button, to be exact. This is actually an input field called with the type button, the value submit. Now let me just show you that in action, and there, as you can see, that's how it changes. Now, what is the use of this, you might be wondering? Well, the thing is, forms have their own way of functioning when it comes to the programming aspect of web pages. Uh, instead of having to code like lots of code on submitting the entire form data, the input type equals the type equals button would in itself do the work for you. If you didn't understand that, don't worry about it. Just note that if you're working with forms, it would be a great idea to have this as an input type. Okay, cool. So that is part 2 of the HTML tutorial. You're pretty much set for HTML. The only thing left is that there's so many different tags that you could use. And CSS is also an integral part of front-end web development. Do check those videos out as well. If it's not published by now, it'll be 20 soon. Thank you very much. Hope you guys learned a lot in this series. Good luck in web development. Stay tuned for upcoming CSS tutorials.